Can't see anything. Where does it? Oh, my screen is all weird. Okay, maybe I will not join the Zoom since it's all weird. I can't.
Oh,
I can't see where my thing is because like my aspect's all weird.
if you want to,
You should be able to like grab it and move the window left or right.
But okay. Ah, thank you. Okay,
No
thank
problem.
you. Thank you.
So is this also 20 minutes? Like,
Yeah, it should be. It's not gonna at this moment. Okay. Cool. Oh. Oh, no, it's gone.
boy. I think it's trying to present and run the Zoom. That's making this. Oh, here we
Okay.
go.
Cool. Is it being
All right.
recorded?
It is recording.
Okay, cool. So yeah, working title, Structure and Morphophonology of Welsh Compounds. Yes. Okay, so I wanted to start with a summary overview. I'm not exactly sure how to start exactly, so I'll just jump into like the main points. Like, so my proposal of compound analysis is that, first of all, compounds are formed by adjunction. This itself is not particularly new. A lot of other people have proposed this, but I am specifically saying that in compound formation, root adjunction triggers a cycle of stress assignment. And this is really nice because it predicts that differences in compound stress patterns are due to the syntactic structure. And like in different languages, you can get different stress patterns with different compound forms. So for instance, if you have multiple stress patterns, you could have a form like this, where each root is adjoined separately to a categorizer, N in this case. And in these cases, stress would be assigned individually to each root. And then when they are joined together, stress is not reassigned, and you would just get two separate phonological words. But if you wanted to get one phonological word, you would need at least one root adjoining directly to the structure without prior categorization. So for instance, the structure 2 was proposed by Hu and Perry for Yixing Chinese compounds, and structure 3 was actually my proposal for Welsh compounds. Either way, both elements will surface in the same stress domain. So why am I looking specifically at Welsh compounds to discuss this particular proposal? Well, we see 3 distinct types of compounds in Welsh, which all differ in their word order and headedness, their stress pattern, and the particular morphophonological processes. And I have argued in the past that Welsh differentiates between compounds where both roots are categorized, meaning you get multiple stresses, versus compounds where only one head is categorized, or only the head is categorized, and you will get a single stress. Furthermore, the distinct morphophonological processes that appear in each compound type are realized depending on the structure and the stress assignment. Do I need to interrupt, or maybe? Okay, cool. Right, so roadmap. This is where you might need to interrupt me and go like, Marisha, why are you talking about that? Cut it out. Like,
Marisha, why are you talking about type 3? Cut it out.
okay, okay. Yes, so that's one of the things. I'm like, how much do we
You're
talk
gonna
about?
write about it later. But
Okay.
Like, yeah.
Sorry, I'm just taking it out.
Oh, I'll tell you.
Type 3 have the reverse word order.
Yeah,
It has like phrasal word order.
yeah, okay, that makes it a lot easier.
Just
So,
make your point with 1 and 2. Yeah.
in which case I probably, oh no, I might need to talk a little bit about word order still.
Yeah.
Yeah, briefly talk about stress, self-mutation, and stem final divorcing. Then I'll give a recap of my plan is to give a recap of of my analysis for the 3 different types, and then compare to previous analyses of compound DM, and also like different approaches to Welsh morphophonologic processes and the predictions that those analyses make, and lay out some questions for future research, aka the goal of my dissertation, and like lay out some experiment goals that will hopefully work into that. Cool, yes, does that sound okay? Okay, overview. All right, so modifiers typically follow the noun, both adjectives and nouns that are modifiers. However, there are a small set of adjectives that can precede the noun. This is relevant. I don't know if I should include examples.
Yes.
Okay. In Welsh, we have regular stress, which is on the penultimate syllable, and secondary stress will appear 2 syllables to the left, and stress shifts with each additional suffix. However, you do have quite a few instances of irregular stress, and if it's in native words, it always falls on the final syllable, and it's almost always morphologically specific. So, for instance, these 2 suffixes, had and high, which are derivational suffixes, always have final stress, but if you put a different morpheme onto the same root, you'll get a different stress pattern. Loanwords typically exhibit English stress, but will revert back to Welsh stress when you add another suffix. So parade and canoe, but paragraph and paragrapha rather than paragrapha. So in this way, I'm assuming that stress in Welsh is actually more interested in the morphology. It's morphologically determined rather than purely phonologically determined. Any questions on that before I go on? Does that make sense? Okay, cool.
This was important for you, right?
Yes.
So this was kind of showing that there is evidence for cyclicity in
Yeah.
stress. So
Mhm.
these loan words have irregular stress in the lexical item, but if you add on extra suffixes, it gets rewritten into
Mhm.
normal Welsh pattern stress.
Yeah.
What does it mean for compounds?
Yes, I will get to that.
So yeah,
Well,
it could be that this gets its own little subsection.
Yeah, so like my point is kind of like we see this cyclicity of stress assignment elsewhere in the language, so we could assume that there's also a similar process in Welsh compounds. But it would, yeah, this is one thing where it's like I have to be careful about it because I would still assume that the when they are assigned is different, and this is an area where I have to like work on it more.
So pretty much any suffix that will trigger this, or is that restricted?
Yeah, well, except for if it's not these suffixes or like, well, okay. There's potentially, like if you have certain phonological combinations with vowels, you can get final stress, but that's also another area where I want to work on. It's kind of like, but yeah, if it's not these, you will almost always get just regular stress penultimate.
What's the point of this slide actually? Because I feel like it's
Oh.
extra information that's potentially confusing. Like, is there something I missed here?
Oh, I was just showing that like
Sometimes you can.
with these specific suffixes, you get final stress, and with any other suffix, you would get penultimate stress. Was the point of this one?
So I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I was just gonna say, like, I feel like that's probably the serve its own slide.
Okay.
That, you know, say what the regular stress pattern is, and then so there are some morphological specific exceptions.
Okay.
And then, like, if they don't come back and just set them aside, it just like a little bit more broadly, like you're not presenting a laundry list of stuff in Welsh. Like basically you're going to bring, your analysis will bring order to these seemingly disparate phonological processes.
Mhm.
So tell us that. you know.
Okay.
Say, you know, it's not just these stress and then like the stem final voicing. It's, you know, it's not, you know, say, I mean, like if you just practice that, by
Okay.
saying that the analysis will kind of like make all of this stuff make sense.
Okay, I will try to see. Part of it is like I don't feel like I'm leading the people in the right direction, but I feel like if I talk too much, that I'm adding too much time, so I need to take things out. So like, yeah.
You keep up.
Okay, so one of the main, most interesting or relevant morphophonological processes is soft mutation. Basically, the initial consonants of modifiers following a feminine singular noun mutate. It does apply in other positions, but this is the one that's relevant. And it doesn't happen when the noun is masculine or the noun is plural. So for instance, in 8, you have merchvach with a V, but if you had plural, merchvedbach, you don't get the alternation. You don't get soft mutation. And same with if the noun is masculine. Stem final devoicing, on the other hand, is basically the opposite process. Voiced stem final stops, devoiced when they're followed by this like weird class of voiceless fricatives, except for sa and sha. And if both stops are voiced, the second will also be voiced. And devoicing only occurs at a morpheme boundary within a single phonological word, and it only occurs at the end of stems. So it can occur like with suffixes, any sort of suffix, but there aren't that many that start with consonants. And if you have a prefix that ends with a stop, it won't undergo devoicing. Okay, so in my account of Welsh compounds, I've shown that there are 3 distinct types, each differ in their word order and headedness, their stress pattern, and their realization of soft mutation and stem final devoicing. So for type 1, I propose this structure, which is right-headed, so head 1 in red, or the root 2, which is the head, is categorized, and the modifier root 1 is not. And then in my theory, the stress would be assigned first when root 2 is categorized, and then again when the second one is adjoined. And either you can say that stress is rewritten or overwritten, or you can say like there's secondary stress and then secondary stress is like gotten rid of phonologically. That doesn't really make any difference for Welsh, so I don't know if I should talk about that, like that difference in analysis. Okay, yeah.
Can you go back one?
Mhm.
It might be too early for this comment, but
Okay.
I'll say it later.
So type 1 have opposite of normal word order. They can be made out of a huge number of different lexical categories. I know that's a huge list. Don't worry about it. And these always have a single primary stress on the penultimate syllable, and they always act as a single phonological word. So for instance, if you have something like this, where brin is the head, you'll get rin as the second element. So the non-head modifies and precedes the head. And there's a single phonological stress and one phonological word. We also see that stem final devoicing can occur where phonologically possible. I say this is descriptive. I will come back to it. And soft mutation will occur if devoicing cannot occur. Again, this is descriptively true. I will come back to it. Yeah, so here you can see like popti with the stem final voice stop becomes devoice, but in gweithti, because the last segment is not a voice stop, you get soft mutation instead. So soft mutation is possible in 13, but doesn't happen.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Type 1 is the one that has just a bare root that adjoins to something categorized, right?
Right.
Okay, so you can help yourself out a little. Like you're saying that that's not an adjective baked. You're saying it's a
okay.
bare root, right?
Mhm.
And farm isn't. I mean, if I remember right, you have like the gender coming in on little n, right?
Mhm.
So farm can't be masculine. It's got to be a bare root.
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I might bring that back later, or like, I will have to talk about I might talk about the individual like gender of words later. So, but I will take them up here. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Is that all type 1?
Yeah, these are all type 1.
So, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
So it might help you be like more streamlined, I think, if okay, I'm gonna say this out loud and you can tell me if it's a terrible idea, but instead of having like, let me tell you about phonological facts about Welsh and now let me tell you about compounds, that you just start in, right? I'm gonna talk about type 1 and type 2, and they've got different trees. And so you can talk about type 1. I mean, I know you gave a slide that was sort of telling, not showing what the syntax of type 1 is. Like you've got to show some kind of evidence that that initial modifier isn't categorized. So you'll want to like take this tree and it'll be like, let me tell you about the syntax, right? Well, phrasal word order is this, but in type 1 compounds, you can see that they're flipped. So this is one of our evidence that it's a compound. So, you know, everything is like directly for the compounds basically. And then you'll say like, interestingly, like here's all the, you know, different phonological elements that happen, like where devoicing can occur, presumably on at the end of root 1 and the end of root 2, right?
Devoicing can occur at the end of root 1. Soft mutation occurs at the beginning of root 2.
So is devoicing occur at the end of root 2?
No.
Because prior to this, you said it was like a stem level thing,
Well, okay, yes, so.
which I thought would be like the whole end.
Yes, if you added a particular set of suffixes to root 2, you theoretically could get devoicing.
Okay.
Haven't seen any examples of that because the data set is so limited
Okay.
at this moment. But yeah, theoretically,
yeah.
you could totally get it.
Okay. Yeah, so that you would be like, let me tell you about type 1. You talk about the syntax that you need for type 1, and then you
Okay.
talk about the phonology that you need for type 1. And the comment that I was gonna say here is let your analysis come last. Like, I
Okay.
think that we can talk about better ways to introduce it, but if you're like, here's the syntax of this type 1, here's the phonology of type 1, and then you'll say like, here's how my analysis accounts for it, right? Because I think that you're gonna have to do more than just tell people, because it's a bit like someone's gonna need some walkthrough, right?
Okay.
So here, you can correct me if I'm wrong too. So root 2 merges with N, and that triggers a like then you go to phonology, right?
Mhm.
And then when you merge on root 1, so you've got the cyclic effect. Now you go back to phonology again,
Mhm.
because root adjunction is what's doing the triggering in both cases.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think showing each of those steps somehow with real examples, like pick one of the examples on the next slide, and you'll be like, here's how this works. Like
Okay.
house merges here, and then it goes out, and then whatever merges with that, and then it goes to stress again.
Okay. Sarah, you had a comment?
Yeah, since we're on the slide, I realize I'm actually familiar with this notation. Like I can figure out like, okay, the root things are roots, like the ends are now.
Yeah.
And then I don't know why there's still an N. I don't know. I think it would just be useful to me. Like, this is how you make trees for compounds.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's one of the areas where it's like, I feel like I should get some background on DM compound, but like also, I don't know how much time I have. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like
you'll have
in general, I think it's probably better to just be like big overarching like
Mhm.
questions and like methods and stuff, and then like kind of give some specific examples, but that may be something that people ask about also.
Okay.
I think, yeah, you basically just have to say that categorization happens in the syntax via a functional head, and you
Okay.
can cite some like seminal papers, right? Like that's really what you need. And the other thing that isn't mentioned, but that I know is implicit for you, is that in Welsh, it's that nominalizing functional head that's also the locus of gender.
Yeah, I'll get to that later. I'll
Yeah,
bring that in later.
so that might need to come first.
Okay. Yeah, there's some organizational things. Okay, so how I have it now is like I work through type 1 and then type 2, basically
sure,
the same
type 2.
order. But if we incorporate a lot of the background information in the discussion of type 1, I think type 2,
It might be a bit simpler.
yeah, it would be
Yeah.
simpler. So the key points with type 2 is that it's also right-headed, but both roots are categorized instead of only one. And because stress is assigned when a root is categorized, or a root is adjoined to something, stress is adjoined to each, or stress is assigned to each element individually, and then when they're adjoined together, stress is not reassigned. They are just individually stressed. And yeah, again, it has like same word order, it's very similar class like makeup in terms of lexical categories, but it doesn't have any noun adjective types. And the adjectives involved in these ones tend to be like irregular pre-nominal adjectives. That's something I'll come back to. That's one thing where I'm like, I'm not sure if I should mention it here or like talk about it later.
Well, imagine that you're integrating the word order stuff into this
Mhm.
section, right? So you can say like,
Oh,
just
yeah.
like with type 1, we have the opposite of phrasal word order, except for this one subcase. In phrases, like this set of adjectives can be pre-nominal, and we
Okay,
actually see that they keep that order in these compounds or something like this.
okay.
Right?
And then I have this as an example of just the different or the similarity in word order. So we have like the heads on the same area, but one key difference you might notice is that there's a difference in stress. So each element is individually stressed and they cannot be analyzed as a single phonological word. And also the stress patterns aren't consistent with secondary or primary secondary stress patterns. So like we would typically, so here, if you have a 3-syllable word, you would have, so number 17 is a type 1 compound. If you have 3 syllables, you would have the first syllable not be stressed, the second one be stressed, and the third be unstressed. And you wouldn't have secondary stress. But in a type 2, in 18, you have 2 primary stresses back to back. Is this a good way to show it? I was trying to show like which syllables are stressed. Does this make sense?
Using the stress.
Yeah, but I also bolded them to try and make them a little clear.
So in some slides, I was gonna suggest like that you show the boundaries of each stem. And in this one, it would also, I think, make sense to show the boundaries of your prosodic words because you're taking stress, like the assignment of
okay.
stress to be an indication that there's a prosodic word, right? So if you had like parentheses or something, it would be like the candle bit and then candlestick. And it would be maidservant and it would be C. Sorry, I did a gesture thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So that'll also help.
Mhm.
Because I think the more that you can show morphosyntactic or prosodic like boundaries, like show them, it's easy for you, but just from experience, like for other people, they have to like do that analysis, right? And that's a lot of work for them.
Should I include like, so for instance, in conclusion, should I include like a dash or something between candle and Bren, but like a parentheses around it, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
so because the whole thing has a parenthesis and then candle has a parenthesis, right? Because you have like
Yeah,
or no, sorry, that would be like the derivation.
Yeah.
Showing the derivation. Yeah, so just show one.
cool. That helps. Yes. And another key point with the difference between type 1 and type 2 is that in type 2, soft mutation will always occur if phonologically possible. So we have a voiceless stop followed by a voice stop, and we get 2 voiced stops next to each other. So yeah, devoicing is totally possible here, but it does not happen. And we also see that this soft mutation is indiscriminate. And by that, I mean, like, it's not showing up in a place that you would typically expect soft mutation. So like adjectives don't tend to cause soft mutation on the following word. And the head is masculine, so it shouldn't cause soft mutation anywhere. And it can't cause soft mutation on itself, even if it was feminine. So soft mutation is just happening across the board here. Then I guess we'll skip through type 3. Yeah,
Is that, there are 3 types? Or
Yeah.
are there more?
there are 3 types.
Okay.
So hopefully there are 3 types.
Okay.
Well, okay, this is something that like I have a whole extra slide for that, like also you'll notice I have lots of asterisks. I will you can ask me about them. I'm not going to talk about them here. No, it's just like yes, but no, but like there's lots of buts. So yeah, summarizing, the type 1 has 1 stress domain, type 2 has 2. Both exhibit soft mutation, but only type 1 exhibits devoicing. Both of them have phrase order, except for the instances where type 2 has like weird pre-nominal adjectives. Yeah.
It says type 2 twice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll add that later.
I feel like you could probably still keep the type 3. I mean,
Yeah.
like, and also there's this type 3 that I'm not talking about, but like there's facts.
Slide 38. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And then I'm not sure if I should include this. It is relevant to the prospectus, but not necessarily to the talk, but just like they can be made out of a lot of different lexical combinations. Type 1 has the most. Type 2 is oddly missing the noun adjective combination. Type 3 does weird things. It has lots of other things involved, but we only see like noun, adjective, and a noun.
What are others?
Like prepositions, adverbs, pronouns, things like that. And we don't see them in type 1 and type 2. But type 3 also doesn't have any verbs, so it's weird. Yeah, we're ignoring Pickford. Okay, so then I talk a little bit about like what I think is the most relevant approaches to compounding in DM, which is like looking at whether or not the root is categorized, because that's a lot of my talk. So it's generally assumed by a lot of people that both roots are combined with functional heads, both are categorized. For instance, these people, interesting, no Brit. Oh, there's a typo on that. Okay, it's a typo. Slide 31. Okay. I'll skip that. Okay. Yeah. So lots of people just assume that both heads have to be categorized, but not everybody does. Some say that you can just have compounds with bare roots, and quite a few people also say that languages also differentiate between compounds with bare roots and compounds with categorized roots. So the Belder was looking at Dutch compounds, we were looking at Chinese compounds, and Gordakiolaya and et al. Were looking at Greek compounds, and they all posit that like at least one element is bare. So I think the most
Oh, I guess you are gonna do that. Like
Yeah.
show the tree version of those.
Yeah, so I think some of them are really complicated, like the De Belder one needs a whole long explanation because it's really different. It's all like sprouting and it's weird. It's hard to explain, but I was just gonna say like the easiest one to explain and the most comparable to Welsh is the Hu and Perry paper on Yishin Chinese. They distinguish between two types of compounds: compositional compounds, where they assume that both roots are categorized, like the structure I've shown up before, and then they also have this other type of compound called the non-compositional compounds, where they assume that there are just two directly merged roots, and they posit this structure, which is reiterated from two.
So in a way though, isn't the De Belder case, like, although it's more complicated, a bit more close to you? So I know you're trying to keep it narrowly talking about compounds and how like in compounds they've always had to be categorized before, but like actually it's not just compounds, right? Like the
Yeah.
previous literature was like all their roots, all acategorical roots have to first be categorized. And De Belder allows bare adjunction, like adjunction of bare roots, which is closer to your structure,
Well,
right?
this is like a juncture of bare roots, like they're just
Sure.
straight put together.
Sure.
The thing is with De Belder is that her approach is like you have the head root, and then you have a list of all these other roots, and then you just sprout roots all the way down, and like it's all roots, and then like sort of the main root, like you start with the head root, and like that is supposedly categorized somewhere at some point. She doesn't actually say, and then the rest is just like sprouted roots. It's a little, I don't know how to explain it.
Whoever 2020 is also more analogous to you, by the way. I can tell you more about it.
Okay, yeah.
So I think this, so when Sarah was asking about like, wait, what is this like little end thing? This stuff should come first, because this
Okay.
is when you're
I
like,
agree, this would be.
Okay.
yeah, so when you're like, why even look at Welsh compounds, like right there, that whole discussion is this, where
Yeah,
you're
I
like,
also now understand that like the trees that you showed for your analysis aren't necessarily the standard way to do
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Because like, I
Exactly.
started off with like, why not just have and then 1 and 2 on either side? I didn't even.
Okay. So why I
Or
kind of
ends
split it up was that like this was also leading into like previous analyses of like soft mutation and voicing, which like I think should come after the analysis or my discussion of compounds. So
yeah,
I was just putting like everything together, but I
yeah.
guess I should split like the DM discussion and the soft mutation discussion.
Because, so you're starting with your thesis,
Mhm.
which is root adjunction triggers a cycle of stress in phonology, right? And why even look at Welsh or Welsh compounds? Well, consider the like previous analyses of compounds and or all bare roots used to say they have to be categorized. There's some work that suggests they can also be uncategorized, and that gives us this really neat prediction. The prediction is that if you can merge a bare root with something else that's categorized, you'll get one stress and you can show the tree like you
Mhm.
did. If you have like two separate categorized elements coming together, as in a compound, you should have two separate stresses.
Mhm.
Surprise, that's what Welsh does, right?
Okay,
Like
yeah.
Welsh is what's showing that your prediction is correct.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so like coming back to the food theory, why I think it's the most comparable is like because they specifically say that the difference in structure leads to differences in phenology. So for them, for instance, non-compositional compounds are subject to different Tonsandi processes than compositional compounds because they're in a single phonological word. So that's why I was using this example instead of the Belter.
So if you broaden out beyond, like you're trying to keep everything really narrowly in compounds, but if you broaden out to like the literature about the syntax probability interface in general, like people have said differences in structure at the phrasal level, like also, you know, like this isn't something unique to them. So you can cite a bit more broadly, I think, and I can help you with that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But like, yes, we think like differences in syntax can often lead to differences in phonology.
Sorry, just writing myself.
And that, yeah, that might like just tie you a little less strongly to who we're pairing.
Okay, cool. And yeah, one key difference for me is that I have like mismatch. So there is this proposal called the matching condition, where it just basically states that elements in compounds must be of the same size and type. And for a lot of proposals of compounds, this works, at least with the adjunction ones. But like this is not the case for me, and part of why I think there is a mismatch is because like of my evidence for why heads are categorized is that like gender is not an innate part of the root. Some roots are always masculine or feminine, but you also get variation. But compounds always.
Can you go back? Sorry, what is this?
Yeah, so like so if you have triad, which means spouse, if you're talking about a man, this word is masculine. If you're talking about a woman, the word is feminine.
Oh, can you give an example like that has an adjective in there so that we can see the difference, you know?
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Some vary according to meaning.
Yeah.
Sight is masculine, but appearance is feminine.
Yeah.
Meanings vary according to gender.
Yeah.
I feel
So
like that's way around. Like a change
Oh.
in gender, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you change the gender, you get a different meaning.
I don't know. I don't know if I could. I don't
Because there's
know.
nothing masculine
Which one
about
comes
sight
first?
or feminine about appearance, right?
Right. Okay. So. Okay, I'll rephrase that.
Yeah. And then, yeah, is it just in adjectives that you can see the difference? Is it
Yeah.
in plurals?
Yeah. No.
No.
The only way that you can see gender in Welsh is on adjectives
Okay.
following the word.
Yeah, so I see
there's
if you can
nothing
find,
phonological.
like blurry sight or something. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Very slide.
Amazing sight. Amazing appearance. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Find some kind of adjective.
Okay. However, when we look at compounds, heads or compounds always have the synsum features of the head. So for instance, in this type 1, the head is actually plural. And when you add it in a compound, the compound is also plural. And in type 3, the feminine, the head is font, which is like the first element, is feminine. So the whole thing is feminine, even though tren by itself would be masculine. And say more by itself would be masculine, but you match the synsum features of the head. So it doesn't make sense to say that like the head is bare, because then where are the synsum features coming from? Why is it so specific? Why is there no mismatch? We also get some gender agreement in type 1 and type 3. Not sure about type 2 because of the weird adjectives. And here you would just get like the feminine form, the feminine allomorph.
Okay, and you have a reason why you think this shows that type 1 has a bare root, right? There's an extra
Potentially. Yeah, so part of this is that there are domains of allomorphy selection. And different people have posited that the domain of allomorphy selection in DM is bigger or smaller, depending on their theory. So one thing here was that if you only get gender agreement in type 1 and type 3 and not in type 2, that would be like explicitly because of a structural difference. So in type 1 and type 2, they would be, or type 3, they would be in the same domain, and therefore you could get this allomorphy selection. But in type 2, they would be outside of the domain of allomorphy selection, and you couldn't get this sort of power.
Yeah,
I don't know
so-
if this is true.
Predicted for type 2.
Yes-ish. Yes-ish. The thing is that I'm not sure if it's actually possible to show this because the adjectives found in type 2s are so limited. So I'm not sure if you could actually get an example. I don't
Do
know.
any of them?
So it's.
And
if
the
it's
ones
not
that-
Gonna bring evidence to bear on the proposal, then we don't.
Yeah,
need it.
okay.
If it is, then you should explain.
Okay.
Well, yeah, so one thing is that this is kind of crucial for your analysis, right? That, but the other thing
Well,
to
not
say,
crucial for the analysis, maybe not for the talk.
Well, I mean, like.
it's
you
crucial.
should Tell us how it's crucial.
Yeah, because this is your only evidence that type 1 might have a bare root, right? And we ideally like only would know this via contrast with type 2, but you're saying like type 2 we can't get. Right?
Potential.
I mean, so part of the thing is like your project is I've got this hypothesis, I have this theory, and part of the issue is that no one's looked at this data so rigorously like you have. And so you know that there are all sorts of gaps
Mhm.
in the data, which is gonna, I assume, be part of the talk too. And so that's like part of what the dissertation is, right? It's like I've got this theory, and in order to like actually prove it or not, I have to like fill in all these empirical gaps.
Right.
And I'm gonna do part of that via like an experiment. So it's okay if you don't have all of the answers, right? But like this kind of stuff should go up when you're talking about type 1 versus type 2.
Okay.
So you're like, phrasal word order is this, type 1 has the opposite. There's evidence that the head is categorized, and I take this kind of agreement as evidence that, like, you'll have to explain why you think so, but evidence that the root and the head are in some kind of same domain, right? Like I take it as evidence that the root is bare. So you might need to like explain it a bit more,
Okay.
but I think it's crucial.
Okay. I will work on that. Cool. And so one area of like work is like evidence for why non-heads in type 2 are categorized, and like, yeah, the main evidence is looking at the difference in stress pattern, but there's also some like lexical specificity. So for instance, we don't see any noun adjective combinations, and when you have an adjective noun or adjective verb combination, the adjectives found in these combinations are always or almost always pre-nominal. There are some that like can be nouns.
Wait, why does all of this point to the fact that the non-head is categorized?
Well, so if there is some sort of lexical specificity, if they're just bare roots attaching, then there shouldn't be anything lexically specific, right? Like, why would those adjectives be so weird? Or maybe it's the case that those are not compounds because we can't differentiate them from phrases, really, like based on the like phonological form. So maybe they're not compounds, in which case you can only have like noun or noun verb or adjective compounds in type 2. So there's potentially some very lexically specific combinations. So for instance, here, come is an adjective that just always precedes the noun. It never follows it. And this looks like like phonologically, this looks like a phrase. There are two phonological words. They're in the right phrase order. Why are they a compound and not a phrase? That's a good question. Yeah, that's okay. We might be getting up there in time, so if people need to go, I won't be offended, but I'll just keep going, I guess. There's so much more. Okay, so yeah, there's a big debate over how to approach an analysis of soft mutation. Like, I feel it's almost like it's bad to group them up this way, but like, I'm just trying to give you the bare bones of the information that you need. Like, sometimes people say it's a morpheme, either like you get a realized morpheme sort of thing, or maybe you have allomorphy selection. Some people say, no, it's a floating feature. And other people are just like, no, just let's just do rules. In my account, I said it's a realization of a plus feminine feature that inserts phonological features in particular contexts. And these features are docked to the following segment in the underlying representation. They're ordered. So I wouldn't do type 3 because I'm not really talking about it. It works really well for type 3 because you get the head as specified plus or minus feminine. But that's kind of weird for type 2 and type 1. So my analysis was that there's a linking element that inserts this feature. And it's inserted post-syntactically, so it doesn't have like any synthetic features itself, like it doesn't contribute to the synthetic features of the compound. So you'd have structure from 15 reiterated, and then you get this insertion of the linking element. And this would be the same for type 1 as well. You have the bare structure and then insert this linking element, and it would just always insert the correct feature. Hello? Okay. It's a little more complicated with type 1, however, because I'm still saying that a linking element is docked to the following syllable or following segment, in which case you get voicing of voiceless stops in the first segment of the second element. But then highly ranked markedness constraints lead to devoicing in certain stop-stop combinations. And one problem with this is that it's perfectly describes the data that I have, but there are a lot of gaps in the possible stop-stop combinations. So you can see, like in type 1, we have voiceless voiceless and voiceless combinations, but in type 2, we only have, or type 2 and type 3, we only have voiceless voiced combinations. But luckily, this analysis makes very explicit predictions about what we are going to get. So in type 1, if you have the gap is voiceless voiced, so if you have da, we would expect there to actually be voice or soft mutation here. So a voiceless stop followed by a voiced fricative. Wouldn't my analysis expects that there isn't going to be devoicing? Or yeah. Same with a voice stop followed by a voice stop. With type 2, similarly, you would just expect all of the gaps to be filled with the soft mutated forms. And you'd like soft devoicing is never predicted anyways, but we still never see these combinations. Type 3 is more complicated. I guess I won't go over it because it depends on the feminine or masculine head. But the gaps in the data mean that there are quite a few pressing questions. So for instance, like what other evidence can be found for categorization and non-categorization? Is there limits on where derivational affixes can go? I've seen them on the heads, but not ever on the roots or the non-head elements. So that could mean that there's, that could be evidence against categorization of the non-head elements. There are some questions about allomorphy selection. And then also, how do we differentiate type 2 compounds from phrases? Need to work on some constituency tests to look at that. And then there's also questions in DM about looking at exocentric versus endocentric compounds. So compounds with heads and compounds without heads. And how would those different approaches work in Welsh? Because some are compatible and some not. But there are also some phonology questions, one of which is, well, what if the difference in morphophonology is not because of structure, but because of something phonological? So there's, in the data that I currently have, there are some tendencies, but there's just too many gaps to say for certain. So for instance, like, is it coincidental that all the examples with word funnel voiceless stops are type 1? Maybe, because there aren't that many in Welsh with word final voiceless stops, but it's so weird that they're only found in type 1. Also, another thing is that type 1 compounds only have monosyllabic heads, at least in the things that I found. So in this pair, oh, I forgot to say 30 is type 1 and 31 is type 2. So we have the same non-head and the same stop combination, but we have type 1 for the monosyllabic head and type 2 for the multisyllabic head. So that's, an interesting tendency that seems to be held up, but we also see that type 2 heads can be monosyllabic. So there's still a question of like, if you're monosyllabic, are you going to be type 1 or type 2? And then of course, the other questions like how should self-mutation be analyzed? Is it actually a linking element or is it a more general morphophonological process? And crucially, is the difference in soft mutation versus devoicing due to the structure, or is it something more like phonology? And if so, what is the actual structure of Welsh compounds? Just leading back to that. And one nice thing about this is a lot of these gaps can be filled in by an experiment. So the goals of this experiment would be to answer 3 specific questions. Firstly, do compounds exhibit the predicted alternations? And secondly, is it consistent within compound types? Maybe there's some variation. And also, are there phonological restrictions on the components of compounds? And yeah, conclusion, I will rework this. Yes, yes. The end, and then tentative timeline. Okay, cool, yes.
Hi.
Yeah.
So the prospectus you want to defend, your plan for what you're gonna do for the dissertation.
Mhm.
I heard 2 different talks.
Yeah, so this is
So-
the thing.
One talk was, I have this proposal about the syntax phonology interface, and it is that every time that you merge a root, you go to phonology. So that we assume that there's this like cyclic phonological cycle. And in that first talk, Welsh is like the sandbox where you're going to test this theory. You have all these reasons to think that Welsh is a good place to test it because there's 2 different kinds of compounds and they have different syntax in exactly this way. And they also have different phonology, except that this is still the first talk. There are all of these gaps in knowledge. And so your project for your dissertation is that you're going to go and rule out alternative hypotheses. So you're going to be searching for evidence that the bare roots are really bare, that the categorized non-heads are really categorized, and to fill in all these phonological gaps, because I still think that maybe the choice between type 1 and type 2 is phonologically driven and not syntactically driven. But you're going to do that via an experiment. Okay, the second talk that I heard was about specific analyses of soft mutation and how the different analyses make different predictions about what you will find.
Yeah.
And it seems like a totally different talk.
Yeah, so I'm less interested in that one, but it is like relevant. I don't know. So yeah, this is the thing is like, I'm definitely more interested in the first talk you described, but the second talk is not irrelevant to that because the way you analyze soft mutation means you have very different expectations about what the rest of the analysis will look like. So for instance, like some people say like soft mutation is not a phonological feature, it's just allomorphy selection, in which case you get a similar process, but you could get probably the same thing. You just get like maybe a different ranking of the sorry, I'm trying to work it through in my head. You'd probably get the same predictions here. But like if you assume that like it depends on the ranking of the realization. I don't know. So yeah, it depends. Like for instance, if you did a realized morpheme instead, where like soft mutation is triggered by a morpheme and you have realized morpheme, where you rank the morpheme in terms relative to like ident constraints, you would get really different predictions.
So well, okay, so I think you've got to pick something, because the prospectus, you can't give a defense of the entire dissertation that you haven't written yet, right? You want to give people a clear idea of what you're trying to do. And if I understand you right, the idea is to kind of try to push this theory that root adjunction is what
Mhm.
triggers phonological cycles.
Yes.
Yeah, so unless you can fit the soft, if the soft mutation is directly relevant to that, like directly relevant to root adjunction or syntactic structures.
I don't think, well, so it's kind of a question of like where part of it is, so it's sort of relevant in that you have to pick one, and I don't know that they all make the same prediction. So we have in type 1 and type 2, we have soft mutation just happening all over the place where it, like, there's nothing about the components that should be causing soft mutation, but it's still happening. So that needs to be coming from somewhere, whether or not it's like a general morphological process that happens at boundaries, unless it's told to not happen, because there's places where it doesn't happen.
It might just happen in compounds. Regularly.
But it doesn't happen just in compounds, it happens elsewhere as well.
Yeah, but it might happen regularly in compounds. Compounds often have different phonology.
Yeah, that's
phrases,
true.
right?
Well, it also happens with prefixes and some suffixes.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it just, the only places where it doesn't happen is where there's a thing that shouldn't undergo or shouldn't cause soft mutation. So, like, yeah, I don't know.
Like, even if, like,
Sorry, I
because
can't
of the time constraints and because of like the size of what like the education project is, I think it's fine if you have things, even that are like things that are directly relevant to answering your questions that you just might not have the time to talk about in detail.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, so,
You could keep it as pocket slides, as Chris Geisler would always call them.
okay, so then specifically which parts about, okay, so
I think you could cut a lot
so
in general.
about soft mutation.
Yeah.
So like this is irrelevant. I
I
can
think
cut
we'll
it.
probably cut a lot about the open questions unless they're directly relevant to, and I'm addressing this one and this one and this one in the experiment.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Sort of like
actually,
a list of,
Yeah, this
no,
is,
I think a lot of the open questions
Oh.
could be a little more beefed out.
okay.
So, actually, can I say something back to you, which I think, so there's a reason why I think the soft mutation stuff is a bit irrelevant.
Yeah.
And it's this, so, okay, so you start out with this thesis that root, do you think I can draw on without erasing Suri's little guys? Okay, so type 1.
No.
They're so cute. Have a heart. Oh my gosh, okay. High priority content. Like,
So
this, right? Like this?
yes,
So this would be like this.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you start out with this thesis statement that is every time you adjoin a root, you trigger phonological cycle stress,
Mm.
right? And you've got these differences. So when you're talking about type 1 versus type 2, you have to talk about the syntactic difference, which is here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you want to talk about the phonological differences, which is stress, right?
Yeah.
And then you're kind of using stress as like a proxy for phonological domains. So you might be like, are there any other morphological processes? So this is categorization and a little bit of like word order, morpheme order, and stress. And then you'll be like, well, I'm not just making this up. I know I'm using stress as like a proxy for phonological domains. Is there any other morphophonological process that suggests there's a phonological domain? Yeah, spinal devoicing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's different between them. What's the same between them is soft mutation.
Mhm.
So soft mutation doesn't actually help you with your thesis statement at
Right,
all.
okay.
That's what I was thinking when because otherwise it's like this list of like syntax and phonology sort of characteristics. But
Okay,
as long as you can keep bringing people back, it's going to make it feel a bit more organized. Where you're
Okay.
like, I've got these two kinds of compounds, and then you discuss the differences in syntax and you discuss the differences in phonology, which is stress. And so maybe after you discuss those things for type 1 and type 2, then you say, by the way, there's also final devoicing that's different between them. So I'm not like making this up, right? Like,
Mhm.
so soft mutation
Yeah.
doesn't actually like help.
Yeah, okay. So I can't leave it out altogether, but I can definitely like chunk down, like I don't need any of these sort of questions.
So
Um,
what if the first part of your talk was, for the first 10 minutes, laying out these differences and then showing how your analysis would get the differences between them? And then you're like, okay, so my plan, right? You can say like my work plan, the dissertation plan, is that there's a lot of open empirical questions. Because like one possible, I think that there are differences in predictions between your hypothesis and maybe a more commonly cited hypothesis, which is that merging little n is what triggers like spell out, right? And so you'd want to like consider that alternative. There's an alternative hypothesis, which is that the phonological differences between them are not due to a syntactic difference, but to phonological characteristics. And so like those are your open questions where you're like, here's my plan. Like, look, this was a really beautiful theory, right? But there's all these open questions that make it really uncertain. So I'm going to address this, and I'm going to do that in an experiment. And you might want to tell us a bit more. Like, are you going to use real words, nonce words? You don't have to have all the details, but to give us an overview of what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'd like to use real words.
Although if you're wondering, like, does soft mutation apply here? And there happen to be no words of the right phonological shape.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there should be, like, across the data, like across it, there's enough combinations. But one of the questions is like, can something from type 2 be used in type 1? So that's, yeah,
Yeah,
that would still be informative.
yeah.
And like part of the hypothesis is like, well, maybe some things are lexically specific, or like maybe there's something about, yeah, so like using real words would be relevant there.
Yeah.
Middle of your slides, you cited this kind of proposal for, I guess, a definition for compounds, which is that compounds are when you have like the same structure, you put them together. And that's not what yours
So
is
that's
like. So, or that's like a type 2, but it's not like a type 1. And it wasn't like that one.
Yeah.
So, so I was just wondering, oh, when I saw this, I thought, oh yeah, that's right. So what do we gain by calling these compounds? Like maybe type 2 is the compound and type 1 is something else. So what makes them the same? And I guess that would be well, what do you think?
Well, so if anything wasn't a compound, it'd be type 2 because they look like phrases. And if it looks like a phrase and sounds like a phrase, it's probably might be a phrase. Type 1, it's like by every other definition other than this one, in my proposal, it's a compound. It's a single phonological word, it acts as a single word, it's two roots put together.
But it's not, it doesn't satisfy the match.
Yes, I mean, not all proposals for compounds satisfy the matching condition. The ones that use adjunction tend to, and the ones that use like more phrasal syntactic structures and things like incorporation and stuff, they don't care as much. So it's a mixed bag.
So I guess what do you gain by calling them, by saying that these are both compounds and they're different types of compounds? Like, does it buy you anything in terms of like the description or explanation?
Well, for me, the benefit is that you can get more phonologically diverse types, I guess. So, and also like, I mean, this comes kind of to the like the discussion about exocentric compounds, which is yeah, exocentric compounds, which like there's a lot of debate about like how do you determine exocentricity? Like, is it semantic? Is it not? And like Welsh is a weird case there because you get some things that are clearly not semantically compositional, or like the head is not semantically the head. But syntactically, the head is always the head. The head, you always have the same symptom features of the head. You never have any mismatch. So if you want, and like the non-head element seems to be, you know, whatever it wants to be. It doesn't really matter. It can be any sort of root. And the difference in specificity, I feel like, means something to the structure. So having the ability to have mismatched structures gets you that difference, I guess. I don't know. Is that a,
So are you explaining to me why type 1 and type 2 are unified in some ways, but we should call them the same thing, something like a compound?
yeah. This is something I need to work on. Yeah.
I thought the other thing could be that they're both domains of soft mutation.
Yeah, so that was the other thing that was coming into my brain as Natalie was talking. It was like, well, one thing that we could just say about soft mutation is that it happens within like any sort of word formations or wordish type formation formed syntactically at any morpheme boundary except where it's told not to, basically. So this is where like the discussion of type 3 is relevant, because if the first element is a masculine noun, you will not get soft mutation, even though you could. So it's not the case that it just happens at any time. There are cases where it doesn't happen, but those cases are where either a different type of mutation happens. So other types of type 3 compounds, you see soft mutation all over, or different types of mutation like nasal or aspirate. Or if the first element is like a head and it's a masculine noun, or potentially a plural noun. I haven't seen one of those, but in those cases, you just don't see it. So it is this case that like, it's this domain of soft mutation, and the only places where you don't see it is where it's told not to happen. Or you get devoicing, but that can be explained phonologically. Yeah.
So I know that you need to cut stuff, but
Yeah.
but I kind of feel like with Natalie that it's just, you don't have to spell out your entire experiment, but saying nothing about what you would do struck me as just
Yeah.
wrong.
I got to that point, I'm like, I have so many slides. I need to
Yeah.
know what to take out. Yeah.
Anyway, that's just because I'm an experimentalist. But
Yeah,
anyway,
no, I 100% agree. I'm just like, I was at that point when I got to that slide, I was like, well, I was on slide like 70 or something, and I was like, I think, yeah, 69. I was like, I need to get rid of something before I feel comfortable like beeping this out. So
But if you do that in 10 slides, 10 minutes. do 10
Yeah.
Slides, and then you can spend the last 10 slides talking about it. Well, I don't know if that's.
yeah,
I don't think you need 10
work,
slides.
but, yeah, you don't need to.
Yeah.
I mean, at this stage, certainly, I don't think you need 10 slides. But anyway, so my other question is just kind of an ignorance question. I mean, are you going to encounter people in your audience who don't believe in simplicity? Because it,
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not a phonologist, and you know, it seems like there are many phonologists who don't think there's a cycle. So depending on it, I don't know if it's going to raise actors.
Well,
I mean,
and that's relevant to the people in the room, I guess. Are there people
But
against
that's
it?
where your, so
Any
this,
objections?
yeah, this is where your loanword phonology stuff was coming in. right?
Yeah.
So Marisha was trying to say like, there's already evidence for cyclicity and stress, even before we get to compounds. So like that can probably be somewhere not buried in the background stress section, but like, you know, why Welsh? Well, we've got these two kinds of compounds and we have evidence for cyclicity and stress, right? And like, we're gonna see that the stress domains match up in exactly the way I predicted, something like this.
Right.
I mean, I think simplicity makes a lot of sense. So, not
Yeah.
me. I just
Yeah.
think, you know, it seems like there are other colleges that are anti-simple.
Yeah, one
It's
part that I was
OT,
like
it's the influence of
debating
OT.
adding was like a section on cyclicity and phonology, and I was like, I don't know how to add this without like adding like 10 minutes. So I
Okay,
didn't.
so your very first slide where you were like IDK,
Yeah,
I think that's what you need. So your second slide is brilliant because you're like, look, I've got this very specific like hypothesis and thesis statement, right? And so I think the IDK help me out is to like contextualize this, right? So this dissertation is actually coming into debates about the syntax phonology interface. And so you are interested in the relationship between syntactic, like, I don't know, elements like syntactic units and phonology, and you're interested in effects of cyclicity, something like this, right? So you should have some broad citations. Like we want you to get out of compounds as well, because
Yeah.
everything you're saying is like, sure, you're looking at compounds because you can't look at everything, right?
Mhm.
But really, this is like a pretty far-reaching theory
Mhm.
that should make predictions that could be falsifiable. Like I was thinking, you know, why not say that it's the number of little n's, right? One little n, one stress domain, two little n's, two stress domains. Can you get compounds with like lots of little roots stacked up? Because then I think you'd make different predictions.
Well, yeah, so that's another area that I didn't touch on, but want to, is like, I think okay, Welsh is very famous for the very, very, very long town names that are just like one massive compound. But I think at a certain
Is
point,
that why they're so long?
yeah, like
Oh.
something, something, something. It's all a compound. It is just a compound. And but it's like, I don't know, 20 words long. It's very long. But the thing is that I don't know enough about like the longer ones because there's so few that are not town names. And I'm not sure if they're like real because that town was named that way as a publicity stunt sort of. So like, I don't know.
One thing you might want
But
to do,
I think that, or I was just
yeah.
gonna say, like, I think once they start getting a bigger size, you get like, you can't have it all in one phonological word. But I'm not 100% sure.
I mean, we don't know if that's a type 1 or not, right?
Yeah,
So like
Well,
one thing to do,
it would be a type 1.
oh,
What type 1 or type 2, not type 3.
okay. I mean, one thing to do would be either right after you introduce how your analysis works, or near the end to say like, what are other approaches to cyclicity? Because I think like phases are a big one,
Yeah.
and the phase here would probably be the first merge of n.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you've got like, you know, 3 roots in a row, if it were little n, then wouldn't we just expect penultimate stress by default? Because it's just one unit of like,
Mhm.
I mean, although maybe you predict the same thing.
Yeah, that would predict
So you might
exactly the same.
You might want to see if there's any places where your account makes different predictions, because otherwise, I don't know, why not say it's like the max n?
Yeah,
domain.
I mean, so this is the thing of like, there are a couple different structures that you could make them work in other ways. Like
Yeah.
for instance, if you were gonna say, no, that doesn't work anyway.
What if
I was gonna
the-
say something, but it
What
doesn't
if
work.
the inner one had like weird final stress?
You mean type 1?
Yeah.
So yeah, like one thing
Then
you could say is that
right?
if you have like, if you get 2 assignments of stress in this case, root 2 has a stress and root 1 has a stress, but because they're in the same phonological domain, because like they're assigned stress together at some point, so they're in the same domain, like either we say the second assignment of stress just deletes the other one,
Yeah.
which is nice. Or we can say maybe they're the same, but like when you get shipped to phonology is like, I hate having two adjacent stresses in the same phonological word, and gets rid of one of them. But it makes the same prediction, and it would still work with type 2 because it's like,
Wait, does it? Hold on.
yeah,
Like I'm
because
saying, what if you could have like a nominalizing suffix,
Well-
which is the kind that takes stress? So you've got weird stress, right? Like weird final
Mhm.
stress. And so if it were like, oh no, just little n gets spelled out, or even max n gets spelled out, then we predict you get final stress, right? But you're saying if you add on another root, that should overwrite that stress.
potentially, like, if you add on another, well, okay, so the key point is that they have to be spelled out in the same phonological word. And, right,
Yeah.
so like, I'm assuming that like whenever you would join another root, you spell it out again, basically. But with type 2, because they're already
So you, wait,
like
hold on. Go
spelled out
slower
in
for
different
me.
domains.
Go slower for me. So, because here's where you should do like the
Flip
step
through
by
the
step,
slides that I
right?
missed
Oh,
while
yeah.
you're talking about this.
Oh, yeah.
So
okay.
you'd be
Just
like,
curious.
Oh, I'm sharing my screen.
Oh,
I can send this to you on online.
okay, fine. That works too.
yeah.
Are you still
Uh,
recording?
yeah, I think so.
This is gonna be fun to listen to later.
Here, feel free.
So, step one, right? You merge your root and let's like N1 or whatever. Step two, because you merged, like do a stress.
Mhm.
So in this case, we have stress on the N.
Mhm.
Weird N.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Stress on weird N. Okay, 3, merge your root again to what you had before.
Mhm.
And then 4, do a stress.
Yeah,
But so are you saying that stress is faithful to the underlying?
either way, you can make it work either way. So the thing is,
Because
like,
I thought you were saying that now we overwrite it and we'll get default stress, which would be on the penultimate.
well, no, so I'm saying that it would write another stress taking into account both roots. So you would get stress here and potentially here.
But you get stress here?
Yeah.
I
type
type the
one.
examples that you showed us, it has it here.
No, type 1.
Yeah.
It would be
Can you
penultimate
show us?
here.
Yeah, penultimate. That would be here.
No.
So I'm making up an example that might not exist, which is pretend that there's an overt nominalizing suffix, which is one of these, I attract stress to myself finally. So that might not actually exist in Welsh. I don't know. Because you've got those verbal nouns, right?
wait. Okay, I totally misunderstood what you were saying.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Okay, so if you're saying like, if you had a suffix like hot or high or something on the end.
I mean, as long as that's an instantiation of little n, or you can make this like, do you have bisyllabic words? Like, what's a loan word that has final stress?
Parade.
Okay, so what if you've got parade, right? So this would be merge. I mean, I don't know what you're gonna say.
But
there.
okay, but
So
we
there's-
have a problem here because, well, your analysis has a problem, I would say, because you
Tell me.
think that well, parade is multisyllabic, which potentially doesn't happen in type 2 or type 1,
Okay,
right? So
all this is just me trying to find, so like one difference is that since you do have cyclicity and a spell out of like little n only, it probably won't have cyclicity without further assumptions, right? So you might predict that there's like leftover remnants of the earlier cycle of stress.
yeah,
Like, I'm just trying to find differences in predictions between the two accounts. Because
so okay, so if we did have this and we got final stressing on parade, and you added something else on top, you would have it expect to have a stress. My analysis would be that you would have stress on the p of parade, not
aha, yeah, so you overwrite and get default then,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there some other, so
But
what,
we don't have any examples like that because we don't have any multisyllabic. Well, I have a couple multisyllabic ones, but the root itself is monosyllabic and it has a derivational suffix. That's the only case where you get
that's
multisyllabic.
fine, is it a nominalizing suffix?
No, it's a verb.
Is it one of those verbal nouns, which is secretly a noun?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
no, sort of.
We
maybe.
never really figured out what that root was.
Little b.
No, I think it's a little n.
I think, no, but I think you can have it with other. I think you can have it with other verbal suffixes, but I'm not sure. So this is one of the questions, and I'm like, I'm not sure if it could be like a normal verb and be at the beginning of a word.
I
It
don't
might
think
be
so.
the fact that like,
Can you pluralize it? Because if you could take nominal inflection, then you're like, what's a noun?
verbal nouns can't take nominal inflection. But they don't appear in verb initial position. They only appear like in
Yeah.
object-ish position. But so this is why they call them verbal nouns, because they have like the main lexical meaning of the verb, but they're kind of nouns and can be treated as nouns. But they can't take the affixation as nouns. They can't take the same one. So it's different.
Can they be modified?
I believe so, yes.
Adjectives.
I don't know how adjectives work. You can do adverbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you put them in compounds? Like, that's what you're saying though, right? They can go to all compounds?
Verbs can go in compounds. But also what I've seen is like the ones that most of the type ones that I've seen with verbs are like the root is a noun and then you have a verbalizing suffix.
Mhm.
With type 2, you get both. Like the root itself is a verb. The thing is though, the distinction between nouns and verbs in Welsh is really fuzzy.
Yeah.
It's super duper fuzzy. Actually, like the distinction between noun, verbs, and adjectives is often really fuzzy. So, yeah. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah. Can I change the topic ever so slightly?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this IDK helps me out. That
Yeah.
Start and what to put there. And I've been working with Natalie for a few years now, so it's like a very Natalie comment. One
feel
way to
so
organize
proud.
this is in terms of a puzzle. So if
Is
you're
this a Natalie thing?
Yes.
it's not only a you thing.
My colleague Mizuki was like, why do you want us to write our co-authored paper this way? I think it's a UBC thing. And I'm like, is it? Like, okay, yeah, anyway.
So you could show some data, like you had this on slide 38, you had this really nice table summarizing the properties of like the different types of compounds. And you had some data just before that showing kind of example of like real compounds that instantiate some of those different types. So you could show this data and say, look, we have these observable, an empirical fact about Welsh that we have these differences, and we need some kind of analysis of these compounds that's going to derive those differences, and that's kind of a puzzle. What is the analysis that gets us these empirical properties of Welsh compounds? Well, I, Marisha, have this proposal about root adjunction and how it interacts with stress. And that's going to be the solution to that puzzle, and then you can go into your other claims that you already had at the start of the talk, and that would also be a place to introduce, like as you're going through this talk, obviously other questions come up, right, about how to analyze like every single bit of it, right? So that you could also put that near the start. I think some of those kind of questions that your research will address, but that you have not yet, like you can't present a solution to that yet.
Yeah. I really like that. One thing I'm worried about though is if I like present them like this, they're gonna be like, why is that relevant? Because I haven't told them like what stress looks like. So I want to do that, but I'm worried about confusing people.
Yeah,
So,
I think
is it okay?
You couldn't just do this table. I think you would need like a real example.
Yeah.
Like here are some compounds you can like actual, IPA or whatever, and like it was the part I sorry, I don't remember what slide it was on, but like, where we were talking about like
Some of these.
the examples where we talked about putting in parentheses, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, I think
Yeah.
this is this one.
Yeah, so like you could show those examples, like even if you know nothing about Welsh, you can see that there's a difference here, especially if they have those parentheses, right, to make it clear, like, there is some sort of difference here.
Mhm.
We need to account for it. So, you know, without knowing anything about like what is soft mutation or like anything, you can see there's an empirical difference here.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
To rip off Sandy's idea, you know, if you're playing a game, like, let's learn some Welsh. Here's a word, and here's another word, and you put them together, and this is what we got. Here's a word, here's another word, we put them together, and this is what we got. Do you see the pattern? Let's try another one. Here's a word, here's a word, put them together, everybody now together, what do you get, right? And they're wrong, right? Because you set them up with a type 1, type 1, type 2. No, there's this, I thought I knew the pattern. This is a puzzle of learnability. Like, what do Welsh speakers know about their language?
Okay, it is 5:15. I feel like I've kept you guys long enough, so. But thank you. These are really good comments.
What was it, April 1st, right?
Oh, it's just, yeah. I have so much to do.
Got like
in
2
the-
weeks, I think, or maybe a little less.
Also to write the perspectives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And this is why it's like, all of this kind of needs to go in the perspective somewhere. And this is why I was like, I just have so many things. I don't know where to stop. Okay, I'll let you.
So this, oh, cool. So I'll, do you want me to send you the recording?
Yes, I would very much appreciate it. Because I also
Yeah, so
want to.
we've been telling